Section number one of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. The Boy Named Billy. There was once a boy named Billy who spent a summer in the woods with somebody. Somebody had expected to have a wonderful time telling him stories, but it turned out that the boy named Billy did not care for made-up stories. He would listen if they were sufficiently exciting, but even stories of wolves and bears and tigers were not very much worthwhile unless they were really so. He wanted to know about the beginning of things, and what certain days meant, and who started customs, and ever so many things that you'd never suppose a small boy would be interested in. So I've been wondering if there are not many boys like Billy who also like to know about things that are really so. And so I've written down a good many of the things somebody and the boy named Billy talked about after the lights were out and the fireflies came during that wonderful summer in the North Woods. Your very own Elizabeth Gordon. End of section 1.
Section 2 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. How the New Year Knows When to Come. The boy named Billy had begged to be allowed to stay up to greet the new year. He had something he wanted to ask him if he could only see him, but he presently got so sleepy that his eyes wouldn't stay open, and so off he went to bed and to sleep. But all at once there was a great tooting of whistles and ringing of bells, and a skyrocket went whiz right past his window. The boy named Billy sat up straight in bed. "Oh," said he, rubbing his eyes, "the new year has come, and I didn't even see him." "Happy New Year, Billy," said a jolly little voice. The boy named Billy rubbed his eyes to make sure. Yes, he really did believe that there was a roly-poly little person sitting on the edge of the clock shelf, swinging his bare pink feet and smiling happily. "Why," gasped Billy, "who are you?" "Whom did you expect?" asked the little fellow. "I'm Father Time's youngest year, to be sure. Haven't got my license or my number yet. I'm waiting until this racket stops. Were you looking for me for any special reason?" "What I want to know," said the boy named Billy, "is how does the world know where one year ends and a new one begins?" "That's some question, youngster," said the jolly New Year, laughing merrily, "and it took the funny old world some time to settle it. You see, the earth cannot be divided evenly into months and days because the time actually required for the earth's journey around the sun is 365 days, 5 hours, 48 minutes, and 46 seconds. You call that the solar year because the word solar means concerning the sun. The old Romans tried to have the new year come on March 1st, but they had no real system and were always in trouble. So Julius Caesar, the king, told the world that it was most important to have a calendar that could be depended upon to take care of all the time, because there wasn't any too much anyhow. So, with the help of some very wise men, he took the 12 new moons of the year and built a calendar around them. This was called the Julian calendar, and every fourth year figured this way was made a leap year and was given an extra day, making it 366 days long. But putting in a whole day every 4 years was too much, and after this calendar had been used over 1,500 years, it was found that the calendar year was about 10 days behind the solar year, which wouldn't do at all. So Pope Gregory XIII directed that 10 days be dropped from the calendar that year, and that the day after October 4th, 1582, should be October 15th. Then he arranged the calendar so the new year would begin January 1st, and the calendar year and the solar year kept together. The Gregorian, or New Style calendar, as this one was called, is the one we are using today. New Year's Day has been celebrated in various ways since the dawn of civilization, and if today we could travel around the world on a magic carpet, what a wonderfully interesting sight we would see. If you were in China, you might think the Chinese saved their holidays to celebrate all at once. They close their shops for several days while they make merry with feasts and fireworks and general exchange of gifts and good wishes. In preparation, every debt must be paid, every house swept and cleaned, and each person furnished with holiday clothes and a supply of preserved fruits, candies, and ornamental packages of tea to give to his acquaintances. In some European nations, especially France and Scotland, New Year's Day is a more important holiday than Christmas. If you were a French peasant child, you might put a wooden shoe on the hearth for a gift at Christmas. But grown-ups in France exchange gifts at the New Year festival, at which time there are family parties with much merrymaking. In America, the observance of New Year's Day is varied. New Year's Eve, there are watch night services in the churches, gay street revelers, dancing and theater parties, and New Year's Day is a time for general entertaining and visiting. However, the old custom of keeping open house and making New Year's calls has practically disappeared. People are always glad to see the new year and always welcome us in some glad and cheery way, went on the new year, and it has always been the custom among all people to exchange gifts and greetings in the name of happiness on New Year's Day. The old year is supposed to take away all sorrow and sadness, and the little new year is supposed to bring nothing but happiness into the world. So it depends upon each person to see that he gets his share of the happiness. How? Asked the boy named Billy. Easily, answered the little new year. By living straight, playing fair, being kind and honest, and helping those not so fortunate as you are. That's all there is to it, little friend, and there goes the last whistle, and now for 365 days of real living. Happy New Year, Billy. Now I wonder, murmured Billy sleepily, if that was really so, or did I dream it? I'm going to read up on that calendar thing the very first thing I do, and I'm going to play I saw the New Year anyway, and I'm going to try to do just as I think he would want me to do, because I want my share in making this year a very, very happy one. End of Section 2. Section 3 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About the telegraph. Mother has just had a telegram from Grandmother that she's on her way to visit us, said the boy named Billy. I'm strong for Grandmother, and I'm going to train to meet her. We're all fond of Grandmother, corrected Big Sister, and we're all going to the train to meet her. Who brought the telegram? Nobody brought it, said the boy named Billy. When it got to town, it just hopped off the telegraph wires and hopped on the telephone wire and came right out here. That's got magic beaten a mile, I'll say. Whoever invented the telegraph system, anyhow? Oh, you and your who inventeds, said Big Sister. Why don't you study up such things yourself? I can read it afterwards, said the boy named Billy. But when somebody tells it to me, that makes a story of it. Please, who did invent the telegraph? Samuel F.B. Morse did, said somebody. He was born at Charleston, Massachusetts, April 27, 1791, and lived until April 2, 1872. He was a portrait painter and a student of chemistry and went to London to study painting under Benjamin West, where he made such progress that when he returned to America, he was given a commission to paint a full-length portrait of Lafayette. Lafayette was some hero and worth painting, said the boy named Billy. But when do we come to the telegraph? Right now, smiled somebody. The idea of electricity had been talked about for a long time, and while Mr. Morris was away on one of his trips to England, it was found by some experimenting that electricity could be conveyed by means of wire over distances. A gentleman whom Mr. Morris met on shipboard told him of these experiments, and it brought to mind the old belief held by Benjamin Franklin that intelligence sometime would be conveyed by electricity, a belief which he had always shared. He went to work to perfect an instrument and a code for the system which he had in mind, with the result that when the boat landed, his idea was ready to present. He struck before the iron was hot, didn't he? In a manner of speaking, yes, said somebody, but it was 2 long years after that before the system was completed and in working order, and it took quite some persuasion also to get other people to believe in it. But finally Congress voted him $30,000 to help him along with his project, and so he won out. Where before it had taken months and years to get word from or to distant places, it could now be done almost instantly. Samuel Morris's life was one long record of courage, integrity, patience, and faith. Bob White and I are fixing up a wireless on the roof of our garage, said the boy named Billy. It's 2 hours before Grandmother's train pulls in. Don't forget to call me, and many thanks, somebody. End of Section 3. Section 4 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. How the Military Salute Came. I can't seem to get the real snap into the salute that Sergeant Jim does, said the boy named Billy. He drills me on it every time I see him, but try as I may, I can't seem to get the style into it, and I've just got to learn it before I go into scout camp. Want to spring it on the fellows. Sergeant Jim didn't learn it in a lesson or two either, said somebody. He had it literally drilled into him, so don't get discouraged, Billy. I'm not discouraged. I'm going to get it, said the boy named Billy. Sergeant Jim says that when he first went into the service, he just hated the salute, but after a while, when he began to know what it meant, he didn't mind it. What does it mean? Why should a soldier salute an officer? An officer's no better than a soldier, is he? Depends on how you look at it, said somebody quietly. The officer occupies a higher position, and the salute is a matter of courtesy, like saying good morning to your mother or the boy next door. It is also a matter of discipline, isn't it? Asked Big Sister. It has grown to be that, of course, answered somebody, but it first came into being because the soldiers, who were called the free men of Europe, were allowed to carry arms, while the slaves or serfs and poorer classes were not. When one military man met another, it was customary for him to raise his arm to show that he had no weapon in it, and that the meeting was friendly. The slaves and serfs, not being allowed to carry weapons, passed without salute. But so imitative are we all that it was not long before everybody was saluting everybody else, which did not suit the aristocratic army men, who then resolved to make their salute so hard to learn that it could not be imitated without real military service, so that an outsider using it would brand himself as a commoner by his incorrect manner of saluting. And so that's how it became, said the boy named Billy. Well, I may not be a soldier, but I am going to get it if Sergeant Jim's patience holds out. You may not be a soldier, but you are a soldier's grandson, said somebody, and all of your people have been soldiers when there was any need to fight for the stars and stripes. I'll be right there when the grand old flag needs me, said the boy named Billy, and when I'm needed, I'm going to be a captain, so I've just got to get this salute right. You'll have to watch your step in more ways than one, said Big Sister. To be an officer in Uncle Sam's army means that you must be very well educated, a real gentleman, able to train your men, keep discipline, and make yourself popular with them. You should see them drill at West Point, Billy. They know, these fine, clean young men, that someday they will be officers in Uncle Sam's army, so they are earnest, quick to learn and accept the teaching of experienced instructors. Strict mental and physical discipline is necessary to make first-rate officers. "Leave it to me," said the boy named Billy, drawing himself up and putting real snap into the salute. "I'm going to be what Sergeant Jim calls a regular." End of section 4. Section 5 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Candlemas Day. Bob White's grandfather says that we're going to have 6 weeks more good hard winter, said the boy named Billy on one bright Candlemas Day, because it's been so sunshiny all day that the old groundhog couldn't help seeing his shadow when he came out. "Well, I certainly hope he proves to be a false prophet this time," said Big Sister. "I've had all the winter I want right now." "Oh, sis, what do you mean you've had enough winter?" exclaimed the boy named Billy reproachfully. "Winter's the jolliest time there is, with all the coasting and the tobogganing and skating. I'm hoping it will stay cold so we can have another carnival. Wasn't the last one a peach? Bob White's father said he had never seen better fancy skating or more exciting races. He told us to be a fancy skater, you have to have good balance, a sense of rhythm, and no little athletic ability. I'm going to practice so I can do stunts at the carnival next year. Say, somebody, is there anything to that groundhog story?" "Probably not," said somebody. "Mr. and Mrs. Arctomus Monax, more familiarly known as Brother and Sister Woodchuck, are pretty wise little people and are more than likely sleeping the sleep of the just at this time of year. Yet I have heard of them being lured from their dens by unusually bright weather long before the vegetation upon which they feed had started, and that they paid for their foolishness with their lives, which is too bad, because they are really nice little folk." "Why do they hibernate?" asked the boy named Billy. "They belong to the family who do such things," said somebody. "They and the bears and some other animals find it more convenient to store up fats in their little round bodies in the summertime and to curl up and sleep through the winter months, when there is nothing to eat that they really like. Saves a lot of trouble." "Where did that old yarn come from about them coming out on this day?" asked the boy named Billy. "The myth is very likely of Indian origin," said somebody, "but there is also an old Scottish rhyme to the effect that if Candlemas Day be fine and clear, there'll be twa winters in the year." "Do you know why the 2nd of February is called Candlemas Day?" asked the boy named Billy. "It is another of those old made-over pagan festivals," said somebody. "The early Romans always used to burn candles on that day to the goddess Februa, who was the mother of Mars, making a very beautiful and impressive occasion of it. Pope Sergius, after the way of those old priests, wished to do away with all the old pagan rites, but did not dare openly raise the question, so he gave orders for candles to be burned on that day to the Mother of Christ, hoping that in the new festival the old one would be lost sight of, which proved to be true. The occasion is still celebrated in some churches, and consecrated candles are supposed to be burned for protection from all evil influences for the balance of the year. But there are so many of those old saints' days that are so entirely forgotten," said Big Sister. "I wonder why Candlemas is so universally remembered." "I think our friends the woodchucks are responsible for that," said somebody with a smile. End of section 5.
Section 6 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Abraham Lincoln's Birthday. "It's Lincoln's birthday tomorrow, and we do not have school," said the boy named Billy. "But I've got to tell the class this afternoon why I think Lincoln was the greatest American. Suppose you tell us what you do know about him, suggested somebody. Well, said the boy named Billy, I know he was born in Hardin County, Kentucky, in a poor little old log cabin on February 12th, 1809, that he lived there until he was 7 years old, when he went with his family to Indiana, where they were even poorer than before. His mother was never very strong, poor lady, and the rough way in which they had to live was very hard for her, and she died when Abraham was only 9 years old. But she taught him to be good, honest, and true, and learn all he could, and be of some account in the world. After a while, his father brought him another mother, who was very good to him, and, as he said later, moved heaven and earth to give him an education. His school years were few, but he was determined to know things, so he studied every minute and often walked 10 miles to borrow a book. When he was 21, he owned 6 books: the Bible, Pilgrim's Progress, the Arabian Nights, Statutes of Indiana, Weem's Life of Washington, and Aesop's Fables. He used to read after his work was done by the light of the fire on the family hearth. He almost memorized the Bible. He was very kind-hearted, and once when he went to New Orleans with a flatboat full of lumber to sell, he saw some slaves being sold. It affected him so strongly that he said if he ever got the chance, he was going to hit that thing hard. He was never idle, and he was absolutely honest and to be depended upon. When he was 21, he went with his parents to a wilderness farm in Illinois, which state almost lost him, because if there had not been a flood making travel impossible, he, with his family, would have gone on to Wisconsin, where they had started for. After studying law and practicing it for a good many years, and being sent to Congress, he was elected to be the President of the United States in 1860, being the 16th President of the land. He was in the presidential chair all through the Civil War, and when he was shot, soon after his second election, the whole country mourned for the man who had hit that thing hard and abolished slavery. Do you know his most famous address? Asked Sister. Lincoln's Gettysburg speech, exclaimed Billy. Well, I should say. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in the great Civil War, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our power to add or detract. The world will little know nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people, shall not perish from the earth. You seem to know a good many things about Lincoln after all, said somebody, smiling proudly. Yes, but I do not know why he was the greatest American, said Billy. He was the greatest American, said somebody, because he loved the Union and determined that it must at all cost be preserved, because he knew that united we should stand, but that divided we must fall. Because his own life counted for nothing where the Union was concerned, because it is due to him and to him only that we are not broken up into small, independent states, but are gathered together under the best flag that the sun ever shone upon. Never has the world seen a greater example of wisdom, patience, patriotism, and moral courage than animated his every act. Abraham Lincoln is our greatest American because he stood for honesty, loyalty, affection, willing service, and striving after every kind of good. I've got it now, said the boy named Billy. End of section 6.
Section 7 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alan Lawley. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. About Valentines. About Valentines. Will you mail these valentines for me, please, Billy? Asked Big Sister. Sure, said Billy. Gee, that reminds me. We're going to have a Valentine's box at school, and I'd better get some to give Bob White and Pete and Jack. What a bunch of them you're sending. Do you send valentines to all the people you know? No, indeed, said Big Sister. Only to those who I know best and care most about. It's a funny custom, said Billy. Whoever started it anyhow? I think it's a splendid custom. A friendly, cheerful way to say, hello, I'm thinking about you, said Big Sister. And I'm much obliged to old St. Valentine for beginning it. Did he start it? Asked the boy named Billy in surprise. You wouldn't think a saint would be bothering his head about such things as valentines. As a matter of fact, said somebody, St. Valentine had nothing to do with it. He was a most pious man, who went about his business with no thought of anything frivolous, I'm sure. He very likely did not know that he had been chosen as the patron saint of the day. It was the custom in ancient Rome to celebrate the feasts of Lupercalia through the month of February in honor of Pan and Juno, and these feasts were very gay indeed. There was a custom of the young pagans by means of which they chose their dancing partners for the day, of writing the name of a young man and a young woman and having a drawing, the young man keeping the young lady whose name he had drawn as his partner for the day. The Christian pastors of the churches objected to this fun-making, and so they put the names of priests in the boxes to be drawn in place of the young women, and St. Valentine's name came out as the guardian or saint of the day. He was accepted as such, but the young people went on celebrating the day in the way to which they were accustomed, and out of that grew the ideal of St. Valentine's Day. That was a jolly way for it to start, wasn't it? Exclaimed the boy named Billy. When did people begin sending Valentine messages to each other? Asked Big Sister. In early times in England, and very likely also in other parts of the world, said somebody. It was the custom to send a gift to the one who had been chosen as a young man's Valentine. This custom grew more popular year by year, until, as the gifts must be worthwhile, it very likely grew burdensome, and the sending of gifts was in a manner discontinued. Then some bright person hit upon the plan of sending dainty creations made of lace paper with bright and witty verses written on them. Even that custom was about worn out when someone in England sent a lacy affair to Miss Esther Howland of Worcester, Massachusetts, who saw in it a way to make some money. So she started making valentines for sale, and succeeded so well that the making of them and the sale of them has grown to be a very great and important industry. So poor old St. Valentine just had the day wished on him, said the boy named Billy. Whatever did become of him? He offended someone, said somebody. He was beheaded. Playful, weren't they? Said the boy named Billy, as he gathered up the valentines. End of section 7.
Section 8 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. Section 8. Why We Celebrate George Washington's Birthday. The boy named Billy came into the room to say good-bye to somebody before going to the celebration of George Washington's birthday at the schoolhouse. "Your face has some black streaks on it, Billy," said somebody. "Better go and remove them, and come back and tell me about it." "I don't like to talk about it," said the boy named Billy, as he came back from the washroom. "Mom scolded me." "What was it all about?" asked somebody. "I left my cap on the living room table again. Mom found it there, and she held it up for me to see, and said, 'William.'" Somebody tried not to smile. That was severe, but George Washington was often reproved by his mother. "George Washington," said the boy named Billy, in astonishment. "Did anyone ever scold George Washington?" "Indeed, yes," said somebody, "and in a very unique way, too. Mary Ball Washington was a wonderful woman, with quantities of good sense and a remarkable idea of truth and justice. It is said of her that when her children disobeyed or were in need of being reprimanded, that she did not trust herself to do it in her own language, but she always used the words of the Bible." "That was a queer way to scold," said Billy. "It worked, judging from what we know of George and his boyhood," remarked somebody. "When he was 14, he wished to go to sea, but as his mother thought it best that he should not, he abandoned the idea and was given 2 additional years of schooling, chiefly in mathematics, and so prepared himself for the profession of a surveyor." "16 and finishing school!" exclaimed the boy named Billy. "School was rather a different affair in George Washington's day," said somebody. "He was born in the country, at a small place named Bridges Creek, Virginia, on the 22nd of February, 1732, and at that time the country was very small and had few schools." "It must have been fun being a surveyor," said Billy. "It was not much fun, Billy boy," somebody told him. "It was a severe test of character and capacity, but George Washington always accomplished every task given him with success, and reported on it with brevity and modesty." The traits of steadfastness of character which he had displayed in school and among his playmates now came out prominently. He excelled in running, wrestling, and horseback riding in his youth, and in later years, because of his wisdom, patience, tolerance, courage, and consecration to the righteous cause of liberty, became the father of his country. "My, but his mother must have been proud of him," said Billy. Somebody nodded. It was to his mother, a woman of strong and devoted character, that George Washington owed his moral and religious training. Even when her son had risen to the height of human greatness, she would only say, "George has been a good boy, and I'm sure he will do his duty." "Guess I'd better tell Mom I'm sorry about leaving my hat on the living room table," said the boy named Billy. "I would if I were you," said somebody. End of Section 8. Read by Bill Mosley, Llano County, Texas, USA, February 7th, 2023.
Section 9 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon, about Boy Scouts. "Get my new scout suit," said the boy named Billy, coming in with himself all in khaki. "Look at the buttons, and the leggins and all." "It's very scouty looking," said Big Sister. "I hope you'll keep it that way." "Have to," said the boy named Billy, "or get a demerit. Going for drill now, over on the parade ground in front of the armory. Just got long enough for somebody to tell me when and where the Boy Scout movement started." "The Boy Scout movement," said somebody, "started in England in 1908, being launched by Sir Robert S. Baden-Powell." "Oh, say!" exclaimed the boy named Billy. "Why did we have to let England beat us to it?" "We didn't exactly," said somebody, smiling at the zeal of the young patriot, "because at that very time we had two organizations which had the same purpose in view. One was called the Woodcraft Indians, founded by Ernest Seton Thompson, and another called the Sons of Daniel Boone, founded by Dan Beard. Both men were popular writers of out-of-door stories and greatly interested in boys and their sports and activities. Scouting gives a boy something to do, something he likes to do, something worth doing. It has succeeded in doing what no other plan of education has done, made the boy want to learn. It organizes the gang spirit into group loyalty. In 1910, both these organizations were combined under the title of the Boy Scouts of America. And, as you of course know, Billy Boy, before a boy can become a scout, he must take the Scout Oath of Office. "Yes, indeed," said the boy named Billy. "Wait till I see if I'm up on that. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country, and to obey the Scout law, to help other people at all times, to keep myself physically strong, mentally awake, and morally straight." A scout is required to know the Scout Oath and law and subscribe to both. But his obligation does not end here. He is expected not only not to forget his oath and law, but to live up to them in letter and spirit from first to last. "Fine," said somebody. "That sounds like a perfectly good working rule. Now what are some of your ideals as scouts?" "Well," said Billy, "we're divided into 3 classes. Tenderfoot, that's what Bob White and I are as yet, but we'll grow. Second-class scouts and first class. According to Scout law, one must have honor, loyalty, unselfishness, friendliness, hatred of snobbishness, must be courteous, be really kind to animals, and always obedient to fathers and mothers and somebodies. Be gentle, fair-minded, save money, look out for fires, and clean up after oneself." "On account of that last item, thanks be that you joined the Scouts, Billy," said Big Sister. "And just to help you along, suppose you run up and wash the bowl where you just washed your hands." "Oh, excuse me, sis," said the boy named Billy. "I guess I forgot, but I won't after this. I'm going to have a lesson on first aid this morning, so if you ever get a sprained ankle or anything, I can hold the lines till the doctor gets here. So long. All of which means that I scrub up after the youngster myself, said Big Sister, but Billy's a pretty good scout at that. End of section 9.
Section 10 of Really So Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Alan Lawley. Really So Stories by Elizabeth Gordon. St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day. Bob White's going to march in the St. Patrick's Day parade, said the boy named Billy, and that leaves me without a thing to do. Unless somebody will tell me who St. Patrick was, and why all Irish people think so much of him. Strange as it may seem, says somebody, St. Patrick was not an Irishman at all, but was by birth a Scotsman, having been born in Scotland about 372. When he was 16 or 17 years old, he was stolen by pirates and taken to Ireland, and made to work at herding swine. He was a very studious boy, and in 7 years that he remained a swineherd, he learned the Irish language and the customs of the people. He then made up his mind that swineherding was not the right sort of occupation for a bright-minded youth like himself. So he escaped to the continent, where after more years of study, he was ordained by Pope Celestine, and sent back to Ireland to preach Christianity to the people. But the old priests did not like him. He was very likely too bright for them, and they persecuted him, and made things very uncomfortable for him. Finally, he was obliged to leave there, but before he went, he cursed the lands of the other priests so that they would not bear crops, just to even things up. He was none too comfortable himself, but he did not mind small discomforts, because one cold and snowy morning, when they were on the top of a mountain, with no fire to cook their breakfast, St. Patrick told his followers to gather a great pile of snowballs, and when that had been done, he breathed upon them, and immediately there was a great glowing fire, and they got their breakfast very nicely. This and other miracles made him very popular, and so when the scourge of the snakes came, he was sent for, and begged to disperse the reptiles. "Easy," said St. Patrick. "Bring me a drum." When the drum came, he began beating it with such vim and vigor that he broke its head, and it looked for a time as though the trick would fail. But just then an angel came and mended the drum, and the snakes were forever banished. Just to prove it, they kept the drum for many centuries. These and other marvels were performed by St. Patrick, who lived to be 121 years old, dying on his birthday, March 17th, 492. Historians have relegated many stories about St. Patrick to the realm of myth, but the shamrock remains the emblem of Ireland, proudly worn by Irishmen the world over on St. Patrick's Day, March 17th. The true shamrock, in Irish, Simrog, meaning three-leaved, is the hop clover, which much resembles our common white clover, except that the flower is yellow instead of blue-green. Large shipments of the shamrocks are brought to the United States for St. Patrick's Day. "So the shamrock is the national emblem of Irish people," said Billy. "Yes," said somebody, "and it is said that no snake can live where it grows. Perhaps if one would take the trouble to think it out, one may find in that belief the ideal of faith and loyalty and love of country, for which the Irish people are noted, and that emblematically it means that no